Billionaire returned from a holiday trip full of pride, until his ex appeared holding their newborn twins. Before we begin, drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And once the story ends, don't forget to rate it from 0 to 10. Oh, and make sure to follow our channel for more stories like this. Now, sit back and enjoy every detail. The Monaco harbor glittered under the evening sun as Isla Bennett adjusted the silk strap of her emerald dress, watching her husband command the attention of Europe's elite from across the yacht's deck. Caleb Huxley moved through the crowd like he owned the world, and in many ways he did. At 36, Caleb possessed the kind of magnetic presence that made billionaires pause mid-conversation and supermodels glance twice. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his tailored navy suit hugging his athletic frame, and those piercing blue eyes held promises of adventures most people only dreamed about. When he laughed, deep and genuine, the sound carried across the Mediterranean breeze like music. Isla had fallen for that laugh 2.5 years ago at a journalism conference in New York. She'd been covering luxury travel trends. He'd been the keynote speaker discussing his aviation empire. One conversation about hidden gems in Patagonia had led to dinner, then to a whirlwind romance that swept her from her cramped Brooklyn apartment into a life of private jets and 5-star everything. Mrs. Huxley? A server appeared beside her with champagne. She declined with a gentle smile, her hand instinctively moving to her still flat stomach. 3 weeks. That's how long she'd been carrying this secret. This beautiful, terrifying secret that made her heart race every time she thought about it. Tonight felt perfect for telling him. Romantic Monaco, the success of his latest resort acquisition, the way he'd been looking at her with that familiar spark of desire. There's my gorgeous wife. Caleb's voice was warm honey as his arms encircled her from behind. She melted against his chest, breathing in his cologne mixed with sea salt. Missing New York yet? Isla turned in his arms, studying his face. Even after all this time, his beauty still caught her off guard. Sharp jawline, those impossibly long lashes, the small scar above his left eyebrow from a childhood sailing accident. How could I miss anything when I have all this? She gestured toward the sunset, painting the sky in shades of coral and gold. But as she said it, something flickered in her chest. Did she mean the view or did she mean him? Lately, the distinction had become blurrier. Good answer. He kissed her temple. Because Jakarta is next week, then Tokyo, then that new property in the Maldives needs my attention. His phone buzzed against her hip where it rested in his pocket. Even here, even now, the Empire called. Isla watched him check the screen over her shoulder, saw his expression shift into business mode. Caleb? His thumb was already moving, typing a response. Can we talk tonight after everyone leaves? Something in her tone made him look up. For a moment she saw the man who'd once driven 4 hours just to bring her soup when she had the flu, who'd learned to make her grandmother's biscuit recipe, who'd promised her that love didn't have to mean choosing between dreams. It could mean building bigger ones together. Of course, beautiful. Just need to handle this Singapore investor. Apparently there's an issue with the permits. He kissed her quickly, already stepping away. Give me 20 minutes. But she knew his 20 minutes. She'd learned to count time in Caleb minutes, where 20 became 40, where just one call became 3 hours of conference rooms and contracts. Isla remained by the railing as the party swirled around her, one hand unconsciously protective over her middle. Below deck, their stateroom held the pregnancy test she'd wrapped in tissue paper, waiting like a time bomb that could either make their dreams come true or shatter everything they'd built. The yacht rocked gently against its moorings, and she closed her eyes, whispering a prayer to the Mediterranean stars just beginning to appear. When she opened them, Caleb was deep in animated conversation with 2 Japanese investors, his phone pressed to his ear, his free hand gesturing expansively. The man who commanded boardrooms and conquered continents, the man whose child she carried, the man who'd once told her on their 3rd date that he never wanted to be tied down by anything he couldn't walk away from. Have you ever kept a secret that could change everything, knowing that once you speak it aloud, there's no taking it back? The Huxley penthouse in Manhattan's Upper East Side had floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a breathtaking view of Central Park. But Isla found herself staring at the pregnancy test on their marble bathroom counter instead. The pink plus sign seemed to glow under the vanity lights, as real and undeniable as her racing heartbeat. 2 months had passed since Monaco. 2 months of morning sickness disguised as food poisoning, of declining wine at dinner parties, of watching Caleb jet between continents while she stayed behind, claiming she needed rest. The lie was becoming harder to maintain. especially when he looked at her with those concerned blue eyes that could see through most of her defenses. "Isla, you okay in there?" His voice carried through the door, tinged with the exhaustion that had become his constant companion since the Tokyo expansion hit complications. She quickly wrapped the test in tissue and slipped it into her makeup bag. Just finishing up. When she emerged, Caleb was loosening his tie, his suit jacket already thrown across their king-sized bed. Even disheveled from a 14-hour workday, he was devastating. Broad shoulders filling out his white dress shirt, dark hair slightly mussed, that 5 o'clock shadow that made her want to trace his jawline with her fingers. How was dinner with Charlotte? He kicked off his Italian leather shoes, and she watched the simple gesture with the fascination of someone memorizing moments. Good. She's doing well with the art gallery. Isla perched on the edge of their bed, studying him. Charlotte had spent most of dinner asking pointed questions about when they'd start a family, observing that Isla was glowing and had ordered ginger tea instead of her usual wine. Her best friend's detective skills were getting dangerous. Caleb nodded absently, already checking his phone. "That's great. Listen, I need to fly to Dubai tomorrow morning. The Al Rashid Group wants to discuss the resort partnership, and if we close this deal..." "Caleb," the word came out sharper than she intended. He looked up, finally giving her his full attention. "What's wrong?" This was it, the moment she'd been rehearsing for weeks. "We need to talk about something important." Something shifted in his expression, a barely perceptible tightening around his eyes. In their 2.5 years together, she'd learned to read his faces. The charming businessman, the passionate lover, the man who planned escapes the moment conversations became too heavy. "Can it wait until I get back from Dubai? This deal could set us up for the next 5 years, and I'm pregnant." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Caleb went completely still, his phone forgotten in his hand. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of New York traffic 30 floors below. "What did you say?" Isla's hands trembled as she retrieved the test from her makeup bag, holding it out like evidence. 2 months. I wanted to find the right time to tell you." Caleb stared at the pink lines as if they were written in a foreign language. His face cycled through expressions, surprise, confusion, something that might have been panic, before settling into a careful mask. 2 months? His voice was quiet, controlled. "You've known for 2 months and didn't tell me?" "I was scared," she admitted, hating how small her voice sounded. "I know this isn't something we planned, but Caleb, maybe this is..." "Jesus, Isla." He ran both hands through his hair, pacing to the window. "Do you understand what this means? What this changes?" She watched his reflection in the glass, the way his shoulders tensed, the rigid line of his spine. "It means we're going to be a family." "A family?" He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her stomach drop. Not joy, not even acceptance, but something close to trapped. "Isla, look at our life. Look at what we do. I'm gone 3 weeks out of every month. We live out of suitcases. We attend events until midnight and fly to different continents on a whim. Where exactly does a baby fit into that picture? We can make adjustments." "Adjustments?" His laugh was bitter. "You want me to give up everything I've built? Everything we've built together? For what, dirty diapers and sleepless nights in some suburban house with a white picket fence?" Each word was a small blade, cutting deeper than the last. "That's not what I'm asking, isn't it?" Caleb's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it instinctively. The Al Rashid Group is expecting an answer by morning. There's a meeting with the Singapore investors next week that could make or break the Asian expansion. And now you want me to what? Become a family man who coaches Little League and drives a minivan? Isla stood, her legs unsteady. "I want you to want our child." The silence stretched between them like a chasm. Outside their window, the city sparkled with a million lights, a million possibilities, a million lives being lived by people who probably weren't having this conversation. "I can't," Caleb said finally, the words barely above a whisper. "I can't be what you need me to be. Not now. Maybe not ever." Her vision blurred with tears she'd been holding back for months. "So what are you saying?" Caleb picked up his suit jacket, not meeting her eyes. "I'm saying I need some air. I need to think. Where are you going?" He paused at their bedroom door, his back to her. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, defeated. "I don't know, Isla. I honestly don't know." The sound of the front door closing echoed through their penthouse like a gunshot, leaving Isla alone with the pregnancy test, the silence, and the terrifying realization that the man she'd given up everything for might just give up everything to get away from her. 3 days. That's how long Caleb stayed away after their conversation. returning to their penthouse only when he knew Isla would be at her prenatal appointment. She found his note on the kitchen counter, written in his precise handwriting on hotel stationery from the plaza. Isla, I've taken the Dubai deal. Extended trip. Singapore, Tokyo, then the Maldives property. Need time to figure this out. Take care of yourself. C. No, I love you. No, we'll work through this. Just instructions. As if she were another business matter to be managed from a distance. But it was the credit card statement that arrived 2 weeks later that truly revealed Caleb's intentions. While Isla was discovering that crackers and ginger tea were her new best friends, her husband was charging dinners for two at Michelin-starred restaurants in Dubai, VIP sections at exclusive clubs in Singapore, a weekend at a private island resort in Thailand that definitely wasn't mentioned in any business itinerary. Isla sat in their empty penthouse, her laptop balanced on her growing belly, scrolling through his social media presence like a detective gathering evidence of her own abandonment. There he was at a rooftop party in Bangkok, his arm around a blonde influencer whose bio claimed she was living her best life. Another photo showed him jet skiing in crystal clear waters, his chest bare, laughing with a group that included 3 women who looked like they'd stepped out of a swimsuit catalog. The comments were the worst part. Living the dream, Caleb. Goals. When's the wedding? Followed by laughing emojis from people who didn't know he already had a wife. A wife who was currently wearing his oversized Princeton sweater because it was the only thing that still smelled like him. You're torturing yourself, Charlotte said, appearing in the doorway with grocery bags and concern written across her face. Isla's best friend had been making daily visits since Caleb's disappearing act, armed with prenatal vitamins, organic produce, and a steadily growing list of colorful names for runaway husbands. I'm staying informed, Isla replied, though she closed the laptop. At 14 weeks, her belly was starting to show, and she found herself unconsciously protecting it whenever she felt the familiar sting of abandonment. Charlotte unpacked groceries with the efficiency of someone who'd been managing crisis situations for years. As a gallery owner in Soho, she dealt with artistic temperaments daily, but even she seemed baffled by Caleb's vanishing act. Has he called? Twice, both times about practical things, making sure I had access to the accounts, asking if I needed anything. Isla's voice cracked slightly. He talks to me like I'm his accountant, not his wife. And you told him about the ultrasound appointment next week? Isla shook her head. Last week's appointment had revealed something that made her heart soar and her anxiety skyrocket simultaneously. I tried. He said he was in meetings and would call back. That was 5 days ago. Charlotte sat beside her on the couch, her expression shifting from concern to anger. Isla, honey, you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that he's not coming back. At least not for this. The words hit like a physical blow, even though Isla had been thinking them herself for weeks. He's scared, she whispered, more to convince herself than Charlotte. This is just how he handles fear. He runs until he figures it out. And what if he figures out that he doesn't want this life? What if he decides that his freedom is worth more than your marriage? Before Isla could answer, her phone buzzed. Both women looked at it expectantly, hoping for Caleb's name on the screen. Instead, it was Dr. Martinez's office confirming next week's appointment, the one where she'd find out the genders of her babies. Babies, plural, the secret she'd been carrying alone for a week, the joy she had no one to share with except Charlotte and the walls of their too-quiet penthouse. Charlotte, Isla said quietly, her hand moving to her belly. There's something I haven't told you about the ultrasound. Her friend's eyes widened. What? It's twins. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Charlotte dropping her organic apple, which rolled across their hardwood floor like punctuation at the end of a sentence. Twins? Charlotte's voice went up an octave. Isla, are you serious? A boy and a girl. Isla's smile was watery but genuine. I've been walking around for a week with this news, wanting to call him, wanting to text him, wanting to fly to whatever 5-star resort he's hiding in, and tell him that we're having 2 babies who are going to be beautiful and perfect and... She broke off as tears started falling, the weight of joy mixed with abandonment finally too much to bear. Charlotte pulled her into a fierce hug. Oh, honey, this is incredible news. Terrifying, but incredible. How do I do this alone, Charlotte? How do I raise twins by myself when I don't even know how to be a mother to one baby? You won't be alone, Charlotte said firmly. I'll be here. Your parents will help when they visit. And maybe when Caleb finds out it's twins, maybe that will change something. But even as Charlotte spoke the hopeful words, they both knew the truth that Isla was too afraid to say out loud. Caleb Huxley wasn't afraid of becoming a father. He was afraid of becoming the kind of man who stayed. And somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, probably sipping champagne in first class on his way to another temporary paradise, the father of her children was getting very good at proving her right. At 22 weeks pregnant, Isla had grown accustomed to sleeping alone in their king-sized bed, but she still reached for Caleb's pillow every morning out of habit. It no longer smelled like his cologne. She'd washed the sheets 3 times, trying to erase the ghost of him that seemed to haunt every corner of their penthouse. The morning sickness had finally subsided, replaced by the strange sensation of 2 tiny lives growing stronger inside her with each passing day. She'd felt their first kicks during a conference call with her former editor at Travel Weekly, who'd been trying to convince her to freelance from New York. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was finally ready to return to journalism just as her body was preparing for motherhood. "Mrs. Huxley?" The concierge's voice crackled through the intercom. "There's a delivery for you." Isla padded to the door in her silk robe, hoping it might be something from Caleb. Flowers, a letter, anything that acknowledged her existence. Instead, she found a courier holding an envelope with the logo of Whitman & Associates, Caleb's law firm. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside was a bank statement showing a separate account that had been opened in her name, along with a note from Caleb's personal attorney explaining that Mr. Huxley had arranged for all her medical expenses and living costs to be covered indefinitely. No personal message, no phone call. Just money, transferred like a business transaction. The amount was generous, more than generous, enough to raise the twins in luxury for years. But as Isla stared at the numbers on the page, all she could think about was the conversation they'd had on their honeymoon in Santorini, when he'd promised her that they'd face everything together. "Together," she whispered to the empty apartment, her voice echoing off their marble floors and designer furniture. Her phone buzzed with a text from Charlotte. "Saw the latest gossip blog. Don't look. Just don't." But Isla was already pulling up her laptop, her cursor hovering over the celebrity news site that had become her guilty addiction. The headline made her stomach drop. "Billionaire playboy Caleb Huxley spotted cozying up with model Valentina Cross in Mykonos." The photos were devastating. Caleb, bronzed and relaxed, his arm around a stunning brunette with legs that seemed to go on forever. They were laughing at a beachside restaurant, sharing food, looking at each other with the kind of easy intimacy that Isla remembered from their early days together. The article speculated about their relationship status, noting that Huxley's wife hadn't been seen in public for months. Sources close to the couple suggest that Mrs. Huxley has been struggling with health issues, leading to strain in the marriage. Health issues. As if pregnancy was a disease. As if carrying his children was something shameful to hide. Isla slammed the laptop shut and walked to their bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. Her chestnut hair had grown longer, falling in waves past her shoulders. Her skin had the supposed pregnancy glow everyone talked about, though she mostly felt tired and emotional. Her belly was unmistakably round now, stretching the fabric of her silk robe. She looked like a woman preparing to bring life into the world, not like someone suffering from health issues. The irony of it all struck her as she placed both hands on her belly, feeling the twins move in response to her touch. Here she was, growing 2 human beings that shared Caleb's DNA, while he was literally on the other side of the world pretending she didn't exist. Her phone rang, and for a wild moment, her heart leaped, hoping it might be him. Instead, her mother's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, Mom. Darling, I've been thinking about you constantly. How are you feeling? How are my grandbabies?" Her mother's warm voice brought tears to Isla's eyes. "They're good. Strong. The doctor says everything looks perfect. And Caleb? Is he taking good care of you?" The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Isla's parents adored Caleb, charmed by his success and his attentive treatment of their daughter during their courtship. They had no idea that their son-in-law had vanished the moment things became complicated. "He's busy with work," Isla managed. "The business has been demanding." "Well, he better not be too busy when those babies arrive. Men sometimes get overwhelmed by the idea of fatherhood, but once they hold their children, everything changes." Isla closed her eyes, imagining a world where her mother was right, where Caleb would rush home when she went into labor, where he'd cry when he first saw their son and daughter, where he'd transform into the family man she'd always hoped he could become. But that was the thing about fantasies. They were safe precisely because they weren't real. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Of course, sweetheart. When you were pregnant with me, were you ever scared that Dad would leave?" Her mother's laugh was gentle but surprised. Leave? Honey, your father practically moved into the hospital parking lot for the last month of my pregnancy. He was terrified something would happen to us. Where is this coming from? Before Isla could answer, she felt a sharp kick, stronger than any before. She gasped, her free hand flying to her side. Isla, what's wrong? Nothing, Mom. The babies are just very active today. She forced a smile into her voice. I should probably rest. After hanging up, Isla sat in the silence of her empty home, feeling her children move inside her while their father posed for photos with another woman on a Greek island. The distance between her reality and her dreams had never felt wider. Outside her window, New York City buzzed with 8 million lives being lived. 8 million people who probably couldn't imagine how lonely it was possible to feel while carrying 2 babies and living in a multi-million-dollar penthouse. But as another kick pressed against her ribs, stronger, more insistent, Isla realized something had shifted inside her. The hurt was still there, the abandonment still stung, but underneath it all was something newer, something fiercer, maternal rage, the kind that made women lift cars off their children and fight wolves with their bare hands. Caleb Huxley might have walked away from his family, but his family was going to be just fine without him, even if she had to learn how to believe that one day at a time. At 31 weeks pregnant, Isla had transformed their penthouse into something resembling a fortress of independence. The nursery that she and Charlotte had designed was a masterpiece of soft grays and cream whites, with 2 cribs positioned so the twins could see each other from birth. She'd chosen every detail herself, from the hand-carved rocking chair to the mobile that played Debussy's Clair de Lune. What she hadn't chosen was to go into labor on a rainy Thursday evening in October, while completely alone. The first contraction hit her while she was folding tiny onesies, sharp and unmistakable. For a moment, she sat frozen on the nursery floor, one hand on her massive belly, the other gripping a yellow outfit that read, Mommy's Little Miracle. Not yet, she whispered to her babies. You're not supposed to come for 9 more weeks. But as another contraction seized her, stronger than the first, Isla realized that her children were as determined and unpredictable as their father. They were coming whether she was ready or not. Her phone was in the living room, and the journey from the nursery felt like crossing an ocean. Each step was punctuated by waves of pain that made her double over, gripping furniture for support. By the time she reached her phone, she was breathing hard and fighting panic. Charlotte answered on the first ring. Hey, Mama, what's... Charlotte. Isla's voice was strained. I think I'm in labor. What? But you're not due until... Oh my God, I'm coming. Have you called Dr. Martinez? Not yet. I wanted to call you first. Another contraction made her sink onto the couch, and she heard Charlotte's sharp intake of breath at her obvious pain. Isla, honey, hang up and call your doctor right now. I'm leaving the gallery. Have you tried calling Caleb? The question hung in the air like a judgment. In the 6 weeks since the Mykonos photos, there had been radio silence. No calls, no texts, no acknowledgement that his wife was about to give birth to his children. No, Isla managed through gritted teeth. I haven't. Maybe you should... Charlotte, please. I can't think about him right now. I just need to get to the hospital. 20 minutes later, Isla was in the back of an ambulance, Charlotte holding her hand while paramedics monitored the twins' heartbeats. The city lights blurred past the windows as another contraction gripped her, and she found herself thinking about all the birth classes she'd attended alone, practicing breathing techniques with no partner to coach her through them. Mount Sinai Hospital's maternity ward was a controlled chaos of beeping monitors and concerned faces. Dr. Martinez appeared at her bedside with the kind of calm efficiency that only came from delivering babies in crisis situations for 20 years. Isla, the twins are in distress, she said gently but firmly. We need to do an emergency C-section. The babies need to come out now. Terror shot through Isla like lightning. Are they okay? Are they going to be okay? They're fighters, just like their mama, but they're 9 weeks early, so they'll need some help. I need you to sign this consent form. As Isla scrawled her signature with a shaking hand, Charlotte squeezed her shoulder. Do you want me to try calling Caleb? He should know. No. The word came out harder than Isla intended. He made his choice. This is mine. But even as she said it, part of her heart was breaking. Not for herself, but for the 2 tiny lives about to enter a world where their father was somewhere in the Mediterranean, probably toasting another business deal or another beautiful woman, completely unaware that his children were fighting for their first breaths. The operating room was bright and cold, filled with a team of doctors and nurses who moved with practiced precision. As the anesthesia took effect, Isla stared at the ceiling and thought about the last time she'd felt truly safe, curled up against Caleb's chest in their hotel room in Paris, listening to him make plans for all the places they'd travel together. She'd been so naive then, believing that love was enough to make someone stay. "Okay, Isla, you're going to feel some pressure," Dr. Martinez said from behind the surgical drape, and then cutting through the sterile air of the operating room came the most beautiful sound Isla had ever heard. A tiny, indignant cry that meant life, that meant survival, that meant her daughter had arrived. "She's perfect," someone said, and Isla caught a glimpse of a small, red, wrinkled miracle before the baby was whisked away to the NICU team. Moments later, another cry joined the first, deeper, angrier, unmistakably male. "And there's your son," Dr. Martinez announced with a smile in her voice. "Both babies are breathing on their own. That's an excellent sign." Through her tears, Isla watched as her son was examined by the neonatal team. Even from a distance, she could see that he had Caleb's dark hair, while her daughter appeared to have her lighter coloring. "Can I see them?" she whispered. "In just a few minutes, Mama. They need to get settled in the NICU first." As the medical team worked to close her incision, Isla closed her eyes and felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Pure, uncomplicated joy. Her children were here. They were alive. They were breathing. And for the first time since Caleb had walked out their door 7 months ago, she realized that she was complete without him. The love she felt for the two tiny lives in the next room was so fierce, so immediate, so consuming that it dwarfed everything else, including the pain of abandonment that had defined her pregnancy. Her children would never wonder if they were wanted. Her children would never feel like they were too much, too complicated, too inconvenient. Her children would know love that stayed, no matter how difficult things became. As they wheeled her to recovery, Isla made a silent promise to Mason and Leah, names she'd chosen weeks ago, names their father had never bothered to ask about. She would be enough, for all of them, even if she had to figure out how to believe it one day at a time. The NICU at Mount Sinai was a symphony of beeping monitors and whispered conversations, where hope and fear danced together under fluorescent lights that never dimmed. Isla sat between two isolettes, one hand gently stroking Mason's tiny fingers through the porthole, the other resting on Leah's chest, feeling the miracle of each breath. 3 days. That's how long her children had been in the world, and Isla had barely left their side except when the nurses physically escorted her back to her room for mandatory rest. The twins were small, Mason at 4 pounds 2 ounces, and Leah slightly smaller at 3 pounds 15 ounces, but they were fighters. Their lungs were developing well, and Dr. Martinez had been cautiously optimistic about their progress. "They have your determination," Charlotte observed, settling into the chair beside Isla, with 2 cups of coffee and dark circles under her eyes from 3 days of hospital vigils. Isla managed a tired smile, watching Mason's face scrunch in what looked like concentration, and their father's stubbornness apparently. Dr. Martinez said Mason tried to pull out his feeding tube twice yesterday. Smart boy. Probably figured out hospital food isn't worth the trouble. It was the first time either of them had mentioned Caleb, even indirectly, since the night of the birth. The elephant in the room had grown so large that they'd both become experts at talking around it, focusing on feeding schedules and visiting hours and the twins' daily milestones, instead of addressing the obvious question, where was their father? Isla. Charlotte's voice was gentler now, more careful. "The nurses keep asking about emergency contacts, about who else should be called if something happens. You're on the list. My parents are flying in next week." Isla's tone was matter of fact, but Charlotte caught the slight tremor in her voice. "And Caleb?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Isla continued stroking Mason's hand, watching his impossibly small fingers curl around hers with a grip that seemed to anchor her to the earth. "What about him?" "Isla, honey, these are his children too. Whatever happened between you two, he has a right to know they're here. And they have a right to..." "To what?" Isla's voice was sharper now, months of accumulated hurt bleeding through her exhaustion. "To a father who runs away the moment things get complicated? To someone who'd rather party with models in Greece than deal with the consequences of his choices?" Charlotte winced, but pressed on. "Maybe becoming a father will change him. Maybe seeing them, maybe isn't good enough for my children." Isla turned to face her friend, and Charlotte was startled by the steel in her eyes. "I won't have them growing up wondering why they weren't enough to make their father stay. I won't have them making excuses for a man who chose everything else over them before they even took their first breath. Before Charlotte could respond, a soft knock interrupted them. A young nurse appeared in the doorway, looking slightly uncertain. "Mrs. Huxley? There's a situation at the front desk. Someone's asking about you and the babies, but they're not on your approved visitor list." Isla's heart stopped. "Who is it?" "A man claiming to be your husband. He seems very upset that he can't get information about your condition. Security is with him now." The world tilted sideways. After 7 months of silence, of course Caleb would show up now, when she was at her most vulnerable, when she was still wearing hospital gowns and hadn't washed her hair in days. "What do you want me to tell them?" the nurse asked gently. Isla looked at her sleeping children, these perfect little beings who had already shown more strength in 3 days than their father had shown in 7 months. Mason's dark hair was soft as silk under the warming lights, and Leah had the longest eyelashes she'd ever seen on a baby. "Tell them," Isla said slowly, "that visiting hours are over." Charlotte's eyes widened. "Isla, are you sure? Maybe you should at least talk to him. Find out why he's here." "I know why he's here." Isla's voice was steady, resolved. "Someone posted something on social media. Some well-meaning friend or family member mentioned the twins, and now his conscience has finally kicked in. 7 months too late. But what if what, Charlotte? What if he's changed? What if he's ready to be a father now?" Isla stood up, her movements careful but determined. "I spent months waiting for what ifs. I spent months hoping he'd come to his senses. I went into labor alone because I was still protecting his right to choose whether or not he wanted to be part of this." She looked down at her children again, and when she spoke, her voice was filled with a fierce tenderness that Charlotte had never heard before. "But they don't get to be his what if. They don't get to be his backup plan for when his real life gets boring. They deserve to be someone's first choice, someone's priority, someone's everything." The nurse shifted uncomfortably. "So what should I tell security?" "Tell them that Mr. Huxley is not authorized to receive any information about me or my children. If he wants to contest that, he can speak to my attorney." After the nurse left, Charlotte stared at her friend in amazement. "Isla, I've never seen you like this." "Like what?" "Like a force of nature." Isla settled back into her chair, resuming her gentle stroking of Mason's tiny hand. "Motherhood is a force of nature. I just never understood that until now." 20 minutes later, Charlotte's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it, then at Isla, clearly debating whether to share. "What is it?" "It's from my assistant at the gallery. Apparently there's a very angry, very handsome man in an expensive suit asking everyone in the building if they know how to find you." Isla closed her eyes, feeling a familiar mixture of pain and resolve. He'll give up eventually. He always does when things get too complicated. But even as she said the words, she could feel something shifting in the air around them. Caleb Huxley had returned to New York, and his presence seemed to fill the entire hospital with the weight of unfinished business. In their isolettes, Mason and Leah slept peacefully, unaware that their father was 3 floors below them, demanding answers to questions he'd never bothered to ask before it was almost too late. The storm that had been building for 7 months was finally about to break, and this time, Isla would be ready for it. Caleb Huxley had conquered boardrooms filled with hostile investors, negotiated deals worth hundreds of millions, and charmed his way through diplomatic dinners with world leaders. But standing outside the NICU at Mount Sinai Hospital at 2 in the morning, he felt like a man drowning in his own regrets. The Instagram post had been innocent enough. Charlotte's assistant at the gallery had shared a photo of flowers being delivered for the new mama and her beautiful twins. But when Caleb saw it during a sleepless night in his Maldives resort, the world had tilted off its axis. Twins, his children, born while he was 12,000 miles away, living a life that suddenly felt as hollow as an echo. The flight from Malé to New York had been the longest 14 hours of his life. No amount of first-class champagne could wash away the images playing in his head. Isla going into labor alone, giving birth without him, holding their children for the first time while he was probably ordering room service or lounging by an infinity pool. "Sir, you can't be here without authorization," the security guard said for the 3rd time, but his tone was gentler now. Even hospital security could recognize a man coming apart at the seams. "Those are my children in there," Caleb said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion and desperation. "My wife is in there. I just flew 18 hours to—" "Sir, I understand, but Mrs. Huxley has specifically requested that you not be given any information about her or the babies. You'll need to speak with her directly." Caleb ran both hands through his hair, a gesture that had become habitual over the past week, as the reality of his situation crashed over him in waves. She won't see me. She won't take my calls. I've been trying for days. The security guard studied him with the kind of measured compassion that came from years of watching families in crisis. Can I ask you something, Mr. Huxley? What? Where have you been for the past 7 months? The question hit like a physical blow. Where had he been? Running, hiding, convincing himself that freedom was worth more than responsibility, that his lifestyle was more important than his family. I made a mistake, Caleb whispered, the words barely audible in the sterile hospital corridor. A mistake? The voice came from behind him, sharp and familiar. That's what you're calling it? Caleb turned to find Isla standing 20 feet away in a hospital robe, her hair pulled back in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes that made her look fragile and fierce at the same time. She was thinner than he remembered, except for the soft roundness that remained from pregnancy, and she was staring at him like he was a stranger. Isla. Her name came out like a prayer. God, I've been trying to reach you. I came as soon as I found out. As soon as you found out? Her laugh was bitter. You mean as soon as someone posted about it on Instagram? Because I've been trying to reach you for 7 months, Caleb. 7 months of phone calls you didn't return, messages you ignored, emails you never bothered to read. I know I screwed up. You didn't screw up. You abandoned your pregnant wife and disappeared to live your best life with models and influencers while I went through morning sickness alone, went to every doctor's appointment alone, went into premature labor alone. Her voice was rising, months of suppressed rage finally breaking free. You didn't make a mistake, Caleb. You made a choice. Every single day for 7 months you chose to stay away. Caleb took a step toward her, and she immediately stepped back, as if his proximity was dangerous. Isla, please, let me explain. Explain what? How you decided that fatherhood was too inconvenient for your lifestyle. How you were photographed with other women while your wife was growing your children. How you missed the birth of your own twins because you were too busy living in paradise. Each word was a knife, cutting through every excuse he'd constructed during his months of self-imposed exile. I was scared, he said finally, the admission scraping his throat raw. Scared? Isla's eyes flashed with something that might have been fury or heartbreak or both. I was terrified, Caleb. I was terrified every single day. Terrified something would go wrong with the pregnancy. Terrified I'd have to raise 2 children alone. Terrified that the man I loved had turned into someone I didn't recognize. But you know what the difference is between your fear and mine? What? I stayed. I stayed and faced it and figured it out because that's what adults do when they create life together. You ran away like a child. The security guard had stepped back, giving them space, but Caleb was aware of nurses pausing in the hallway, drawn by the intensity of their confrontation. I want to see them, he said quietly. Please. I want to see my children. Your children? Isla's voice went dangerously soft. When did they become your children, Caleb? When you walked out after I told you I was pregnant? When you spent my entire pregnancy traveling the world and posting pictures with other women? When they were born 9 weeks early and fighting for their lives while you were sipping cocktails on a beach? Isla, they have names, you know. Mason and Leah. I chose them myself since their father couldn't be bothered to participate in any part of their existence. Mason and Leah. His son and daughter had names, had been breathing and growing and becoming themselves for 3 days while he'd been frantically trying to find a way back into a life he'd thrown away. Please, he whispered, and the word carried every ounce of regret he'd been carrying since the moment he'd walked out their door. Please let me see them. Let me see what I almost lost. For a long moment Isla studied his face and Caleb saw something shift in her expression. Not forgiveness, but perhaps a recognition of the man she'd once loved buried beneath the coward he'd become. 5 minutes. She said finally. You get 5 minutes to see them and then you leave. Isla, 5 minutes, Caleb. And then you go back to your real life and let us build ours. As she turned and walked toward the NICU, Caleb followed on unsteady legs, knowing that the next 5 minutes would either save his soul or destroy what remained of his heart. Behind the glass doors, his children were waiting. 2 tiny beings he'd never met but who had already changed everything about who he thought he was. The reckoning he'd been running from for 7 months was finally here, and he had no idea if he was strong enough to survive it. The NICU was quieter at this hour, with only the essential staff monitoring the tiny patients who fought their first battles under warming lights and through feeding tubes. Caleb followed Isla through the maze of isolettes, his Italian leather shoes silent on the polished floor, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird. He'd built his fortune on being prepared for anything, on reading situations and adapting faster than his competitors. But nothing, not hostile takeovers, not board revolts, not even the collapse of his first business venture, had prepared him for this moment. "There," Isla said softly, stopping beside two isolettes positioned side by side. "Meet your children." Caleb's breath caught in his throat as he looked down at the two smallest human beings he'd ever seen. Mason, in the isolette on the left, was sleeping with one tiny fist pressed against his cheek, his dark hair, Caleb's hair, catching the light. Leah, smaller and more delicate, had her mother's lighter coloring but features that were unmistakably a feminine version of Caleb's own face. "Oh my God," he whispered, the words barely audible. They were perfect, impossibly, heartbreakingly perfect. Their chests rose and fell with the steady rhythm of life. Their miniature fingers were perfectly formed. Their faces held expressions of peaceful concentration that made them look like tiny philosophers contemplating the mysteries of existence. "They're so small," Caleb said, his voice cracking. "They're premature," Isla replied, her tone clinical but not unkind. "Born at 31 weeks because their mother was under too much stress for too long." The implied accusation hit its mark, but Caleb barely registered it. He was transfixed by his son's face, by the way Mason's eyebrows, his eyebrows, furrowed slightly in sleep. This tiny person shared his DNA, carried his genes, was part of him in a way that made every breath feel monumental. "Can I?" He gestured toward the isolette, his hands trembling. "You can touch them through the ports. The nurses showed me how." Caleb's hands were shaking as he slipped them through the porthole openings. The moment his finger made contact with Mason's palm, his son's tiny hand instinctively closed around it with a grip that seemed impossibly strong for someone who weighed less than a bag of flour. The connection was immediate and devastating. Every wall Caleb had built around his heart, every justification he'd constructed for his absence, every excuse he'd whispered to himself in foreign hotel rooms, all of it crumbled in the space between one heartbeat and the next. "Mason," he breathed, testing his son's name for the first time. The word felt foreign and familiar simultaneously, like a language he'd always known but never spoken. He moved his other hand to Leah's isolette, and when his daughter's impossibly small fingers wrapped around his pinky, Caleb felt something break open in his chest, something that had been locked away for so long he'd forgotten it existed. "She looks like you," he said to Isla, his voice thick with emotions he couldn't name. "But she has she has my grandmother's nose. My grandmother who died when I was 10. Isla watched him with guarded eyes, seeing something she'd never witnessed before. Caleb Huxley, master of the universe, completely undone by two beings who couldn't even open their eyes yet. "They've been here for 3 days, she said quietly. 3 days of fighting to breathe, fighting to grow, fighting to live, and they did it without you." Each word was meant to hurt, and it did. But the pain was nothing compared to the realization washing over him as he looked into his children's sleeping faces. "I almost missed this," he whispered, and the horror in his voice was genuine. "I almost missed them entirely." "You did miss them. You missed everything that mattered." Caleb turned to look at her, and Isla saw something in his eyes she'd never seen before. Not just regret, but a kind of desperate panic, as if he was finally understanding the magnitude of what he'd thrown away. "How big were they when they were born?" he asked, his attention returning to the twins. Mason was 4 pounds, 2 ounces. Leah was 315. Isla's voice softened slightly despite herself. "The doctor said they were small but strong. Fighters. Like their mother. Like both their parents, apparently. Though only one of us was here to see it." Caleb flinched, but didn't argue. He was too mesmerized by the sight of his children, too overwhelmed by the wave of protectiveness that was crashing over him with tsunami force. "What happens now?" he asked, still stroking Mason's tiny hand. "How long do they have to stay here? Until they can breathe on their own consistently? Until they can maintain their body temperature? Until they weigh enough to go home safely? Maybe 2 more weeks? Maybe longer. And then?" Isla's expression hardened again. "And then I take them home and raise them, like I've been planning to do for the past 7 months. Isla, please, I know I don't deserve it, but you're right. You don't deserve it." Her voice was steady, but Caleb could see the tears she was fighting. "You don't deserve to walk back into our lives just because you finally saw their faces and realized what you gave up. You don't deserve to hold them or feed them or watch them sleep or hear their first words. I know, but they deserve to have a father. They deserve to have someone who chooses them every single day, not just when it's convenient or when his conscience finally catches up with him. Caleb looked down at his children, and felt his entire world realign around their sleeping forms. The man who had spent 7 months running from responsibility was suddenly desperate to shoulder it, to earn it, to prove he was worthy of the trust these tiny beings might someday place in him. "Tell me what I have to do," he said, his voice raw with desperation. "Tell me how to fix this. Tell me how to be the father they deserve." Isla studied his face for a long moment, searching for the man she'd fallen in love with beneath the wreckage of the man who'd abandoned her. "I don't know if you can," she said finally. "I don't know if I can ever trust you with their hearts the way I trusted you with mine." As if responding to the tension in the room, both babies stirred slightly in their isolettes. Leah made a small sound, not quite a cry, but a soft protest that made both parents lean closer instinctively. "Shh, sweetheart," Isla murmured, placing her hand on Leah's chest. "Mommy's here." And in that moment, watching his wife comfort their daughter while his son's hand still gripped his finger, Caleb understood with crystal clarity what he'd been running from all these months. It wasn't fatherhood he'd feared. It was the possibility of loving something so much that losing it would destroy him. But looking at Mason and Leah, feeling the weight of their tiny hands in his, Caleb realized that destruction might be a small price to pay for the privilege of loving them. The question was whether Isla would ever give him the chance to find out. For the first time in his adult life, Caleb Huxley had nowhere to go. The penthouse that had once been his sanctuary now felt like a museum of his failures, filled with evidence of the life he'd shared with Isla and then abandoned. Her coffee mug still sat in the sink. Her prenatal vitamins lined the bathroom counter. The nursery door remained closed, but he could see the soft glow of the nightlight underneath. He'd been staying at the plaza for 2 weeks, ever since that first devastating encounter in the NICU. 2 weeks of daily visits to the hospital, where he'd learned the rhythm of Mason and Leah's care, feeding times, weight checks, the subtle signs that indicated whether they were having good days or difficult ones. Isla allowed his presence but maintained careful distance, speaking to him only when necessary, never leaving him alone with the babies. She was cordial, professional even, but her eyes held the kind of wariness usually reserved for strangers, which Caleb supposed was what he'd become. "Their weight is up again," Dr. Martinez announced during the morning rounds, checking the twins' charts with satisfaction. "Mason's at 4 pounds, 12 ounces, and Leah's caught up to 4 pounds, 6 ounces. At this rate, we might be looking at discharge within the week." Caleb felt his chest tighten with equal parts joy and terror. Discharge meant home. Home meant decisions about custody, about living arrangements, about whether he would be part of his children's daily lives or relegated to weekend visits and awkward exchanges in hospital lobbies. "That's wonderful news," Isla said, her smile bright and genuine as she looked at their children. The transformation that came over her when she focused on Mason and Leah still took Caleb's breath away. The fierce tenderness, the complete devotion, the way she seemed to glow from within when she held them. "We'll need to discuss the discharge plan," Dr. Martinez continued. "Home care instructions, feeding schedules, follow-up appointments. Will both parents be involved in the care at home?" The question hung in the air like a sword. Isla's smile faltered slightly and she glanced at Caleb with an expression he couldn't read. "We're still working out the details," she said carefully. After Dr. Martinez left, they fell into the routine that had developed over the past 2 weeks. Isla fed Leah while Caleb held Mason. The three of them arranged around the rocking chair in the corner of the NICU like a family portrait painted in shades of uncertainty. "I've been thinking," Caleb said softly, adjusting Mason's position against his chest. His son had grown stronger each day, and the feeding tube had been removed 3 days ago. Now Mason could drink from a bottle, his tiny mouth working with determined concentration that reminded Caleb of Ela when she was focused on a difficult article. "About what?" "About what you said. About earning this." He looked down at Mason's sleeping face, at the impossibly long eyelashes that were purely Isla's genetic contribution. "I want to be their father, Isla. Not just biologically. I want to be present, reliable, the kind of man they can count on. Wanting something and being capable of it are different things." Her voice wasn't unkind, but it wasn't encouraging either. It was the voice of someone who'd learned not to trust pretty words from the man who'd promised her forever, and then disappeared, when forever became complicated. "I know. That's why I've been making some changes." Isla looked up from Leah's bottle. curiosity flickering in her tired eyes. What kind of changes? I sold the company. The words came out quietly, but their impact was seismic. Isla's eyes widened, and she nearly dropped the bottle. You what? I sold Huxley Enterprises. To the Al Rashid Group, actually. The deal I was so desperate to close when you told me you were pregnant. Caleb's laugh was bitter. Ironic, isn't it? I walked away from my family to chase a deal, and then I signed that same deal to try to get my family back. Caleb, that company was your life. Your father built it, you expanded it. My father built it because he thought success meant never having to depend on anyone, because he believed that money was the only security that mattered. Caleb shifted Mason to his shoulder, rubbing gentle circles on his son's back. But you know what I learned these past 2 weeks, watching you with them? What? Security isn't about having enough money to run away from your problems. Security is about having people who matter more to you than your own comfort. It's about being someone others can depend on, even when, especially when, things get difficult. Isla was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. What will you do? If you're not running the company? I'm starting something new, smaller. A sustainable tourism venture focused on family-friendly destinations. Something I can build from New York, something that doesn't require me to live on airplanes and in hotel rooms. He looked at her directly. Something that lets me be home for bedtime stories and soccer games and first days of school. You're assuming you'll be invited to those things. I'm hoping. And I'm willing to do whatever it takes to earn that invitation. Leah had finished her bottle, and Isla lifted her to her shoulder, patting her back with practiced efficiency. Even after just 2 weeks, she'd become an expert at reading their children's needs, anticipating their rhythms, soothing their distress with instincts that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than experience. It's not just about career changes, Caleb. It's about trust. It's about knowing that when things get hard, and they will get hard, you won't disappear again. I won't. You can't know that. I can't know that. 7 months ago, you promised me forever, and when forever got complicated, you chose to leave. Her voice broke slightly. How do I believe that this time is different? How do I risk their hearts on someone who's already proven he can walk away? The question gutted him because it was fair, more than fair. She had every right to doubt him, every reason to protect their children from the possibility of abandonment. You don't have to believe me, he said quietly. You just have to let me prove it, day by day, choice by choice, for however long it takes. And if I can't get past what happened, if every time you're late coming home or every time you have to travel for work, I panic that you're not coming back? Caleb looked at his sleeping son, then at Isla holding their daughter, and felt the weight of his choices settle around him like chains. Then I'll live with that. Because whatever chance you're willing to give me, whatever relationship you're comfortable with, it's more than I deserve, and more than I gave up the right to expect. They'll be discharged soon, Isla said, changing the subject with the skill of someone who'd learned to protect herself from hope. I've been getting the penthouse ready. The nursery is finished, and I've hired a night nurse for the first few weeks. Where? Caleb swallowed hard. Where will I fit into that? If I fit into it at all. Isla was quiet for so long that he wondered if she'd heard him. When she finally spoke, her voice was carefully neutral. There's a guest room next to the nursery. If you want it, if you can prove you're serious about this, you can stay there. Not as my husband, I'm not ready for that. But as their father, as someone who's earning the right to be part of their daily lives. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was barely even an olive branch. But it was a chance. And for a man who'd thrown away everything that mattered, a chance felt like a miracle. 6 weeks after their birth, Mason and Leah Huxley came home to a penthouse that had been transformed by love and loss in equal measure. The nursery that Isla had designed alone now held 2 cribs, a changing station equipped with military precision, and a rocking chair that had become the site of countless midnight feedings and whispered lullabies. Caleb carried Mason's car seat while Isla managed Leah's, both of them moving with the careful concentration of new parents who'd learned that these tiny beings were simultaneously fragile and resilient, demanding and forgiving, exhausting and miraculous. They're so quiet, Caleb observed as they settled the twins in their cribs. After weeks of NICU monitors and constant medical supervision, the silence of home felt almost unnatural. They'll make up for it around 3 a.m., Isla replied, adjusting Leah's blanket with practiced efficiency. Even in the soft afternoon light filtering through the nursery windows, she looked exhausted, beautiful, but worn thin by weeks of hospital vigils and the constant vigilance that came with loving someone so completely vulnerable. The past 3 weeks had established a routine that was both intimate and careful. Caleb had moved into the guest room as promised, and they'd fallen into a pattern of shared responsibility that felt like a dance performed by two people who'd forgotten the steps, but were determined not to step on each other's feet. He brought her coffee every morning before the 6 a.m. feeding. She taught him how to read the twins' different cries, how Mason preferred to be held upright, while Leah liked to be swaddled tightly. They took turns with night shifts, passing each other in the hallway like ships navigating by starlight, murmuring updates about who had eaten what and when. But they never touched, never lingered in conversations that weren't about the babies, never acknowledged the electricity that still crackled between them when their hands accidentally brushed while reaching for the same burp cloth. The space between them was filled with unspoken questions and carefully managed hope. "I should start dinner," Isla said, moving toward the door. "Mrs. Chen is coming tomorrow to start as the day nanny, so tonight it's just us." "Isla," her name stopped her in the doorway. "Can we talk? After they're settled for the night?" Something flickered across her face, uncertainty maybe, or fear. "About what?" "About us. About what happens next. About whether this arrangement is sustainable or if we're just postponing the inevitable." She was quiet for a long moment, studying his face with the kind of careful attention she'd once reserved for investigating difficult stories. "Okay." After they're down for the night. The evening passed with the choreographed efficiency they developed. Bath time, feeding, the gentle routine of settling two small beings who had no concept of day or night but were slowly learning the rhythm of home. By 9 o'clock, both twins were sleeping peacefully, and Isla found Caleb in the living room, staring out at the New York skyline with 2 glasses of wine he'd poured but not touched. "Remember our first apartment?" he asked without turning around. "That tiny place in Brooklyn with the radiator that clanged all night and the neighbor who played saxophone at 2 in the morning? You said it had character." Isla accepted the wine but didn't sit, maintaining the careful distance that had become second nature. "You said it had cockroaches." It had both. They shared a smile that felt like muscle memory, a brief glimpse of the couple they'd been before everything became complicated. "I was happy there," Caleb said quietly. "Happier than I'd been in any of the 5-star hotels or luxury resorts I lived in after I left you. Happier than I realized at the time." "Caleb, I know why I ran, Isla. I know why I convinced myself that freedom was more valuable than family." He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that looked like peace, mixed with regret. "My father left when I was 12. Just packed a bag one day and disappeared. My mother spent the rest of her life telling me that love was a trap, that commitment was a chain, that the only security in life was having enough money to never depend on anyone." Isla's expression softened slightly. "You never told me that. About your father leaving. Because I was afraid that talking about it would make it real, would make me like him." Caleb's laugh was self-deprecating. "Turns out I didn't need to talk about it to become exactly what I was afraid of becoming. You came back. Only after I saw what I'd lost. Only after it was almost too late." He set down his wine glass and moved closer, stopping just outside her personal space. "I don't expect forgiveness, Isla. I don't expect you to forget what I did or pretend it doesn't matter. But I need you to know that seeing Mason and Leah, holding them, being here these past few weeks, it's shown me what love actually looks like." "What does it look like?" "It looks like you, getting up every 3 hours for 6 weeks even when you're exhausted because they need you. It looks like you learning their different cries and remembering which formula they prefer, and somehow always knowing exactly what they need." His voice grew thick with emotion. "It looks like staying, Isla. Even when staying is hard. Even when it would be easier to walk away." Tears gathered in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "It's not about staying, Caleb. It's about choosing to stay. Every day. When they're sick, when they're difficult, when they're teenagers who hate you for setting boundaries. It's about choosing them even when they're not perfect, even when they're not convenient. I choose them. I choose you. I choose this life, this chaos, this beautiful mess we've created together." He reached for her hands, and for the first time in weeks, she didn't pull away. "I know I have to earn back your trust. I know I have to prove that I'm not going anywhere. But Isla, I need you to know that you and Mason and Leah, you're not my backup plan or my consolation prize. You're my everything. You're the life I want to build, the future I want to fight for. I want to believe you," she whispered. "God, Caleb, I want to believe you so badly it scares me." "Then believe me. Not because I'm asking you to, but because I'm going to show you. Every day. For as long as it takes." From down the hall came the soft sound of one of the twins stirring. Mason, Isla thought, recognizing the particular cadence of his restlessness. She started to move toward the nursery, but Caleb's hand on her arm stopped her. I'll go. You rest. We could both go, she said softly. Together. It was the first time since his return that she'd suggested they do anything together that wasn't strictly necessary for the twins' care. The first crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. They walked to the nursery together, and Caleb lifted Mason from his crib while Isla checked on Leah, who was still sleeping peacefully. In the soft glow of the nightlight, they looked like what they were, a family. Fractured, maybe, healing definitely, but a family nonetheless. I love you, Caleb said quietly, the words spoken to the room as much as to her. I love our children. I love this life we're building, day by day, choice by choice. Isla looked at him holding their son, at the tenderness in his face as he rocked Mason back to sleep, at the way he'd transformed from the man who'd run away into someone she was slowly learning to trust again. I love you too, she whispered, the admission feeling like both a surrender and a victory. I never stopped loving you even when I hated what you'd done, even when I was afraid to hope. So what happens now? Isla considered the question as she watched their children sleep, these two perfect beings who'd brought them back together in ways neither of them had expected. Now we take it one day at a time, one feeding, one diaper change, one sleepless night at a time. We build something new from what we almost lost. Can you forgive me? Eventually? I think so. I want to. She turned to face him, and in her eyes he saw not the unconditional forgiveness he'd hoped for, but something perhaps more valuable, the willingness to try. But forgiveness isn't a destination, Caleb. It's a choice I have to make over and over again, and you have to earn it over and over again. I will, he promised, and this time, looking at his family in the soft light of their children's nursery, he knew he meant it in a way he'd never meant anything before. Outside their windows, New York City hummed with 8 million lives being lived, 8 million dreams being chased, 8 million hearts learning what it meant to love and lose and find their way back to hope. But inside their penthouse, in a nursery filled with soft breathing and careful promises, 4 hearts were learning something even more precious, that sometimes the greatest adventures weren't about discovering new places, but about discovering new ways to love the people who made any place feel like home. 2 years later, the sound of toddler laughter echoed through Central Park as Mason chased a butterfly with the determined concentration of someone who believed anything was possible if you ran fast enough. At 2 years old, he had his father's dark hair and his mother's stubborn streak, a combination that kept both parents on constant alert during their Saturday morning adventures. Mama, up, Leah demanded from her position on the picnic blanket, arms stretched toward Isla with the imperious confidence of someone who knew she was adored. Unlike her brother's boundless energy, Leah preferred to observe the world from the safety of familiar arms before deciding whether it was worthy of her attention. You're getting heavy, little love, Isla laughed, lifting her daughter onto her hip. Leah had inherited Caleb's striking blue eyes and long eyelashes, but her cautious nature was purely her own, a personality trait that had emerged early and consistently. Caleb jogged after Mason, scooping him up just before he could disappear into a group of teenagers playing frisbee. Where do you think you're going, adventure boy? Butterfly. Mason pointed excitedly at the orange monarch that had led him astray. Catch it, Daddy. Butterflies don't like to be caught, buddy. They like to fly free. Caleb settled Mason on his shoulders, where he had a better view of the world and less opportunity to escape. Just like little boys who don't listen to their parents. The past 2 years had carved laugh lines around Caleb's eyes and added a confidence to his movements that came from knowing exactly where he belonged. Gone was the restless energy that had once driven him across continents in search of something he couldn't name. Now he moved with the purposeful calm of a man who'd found his home. How was your call with the Singapore client? Isla asked as they walked toward the playground, Leah content to babble to herself while observing the passing joggers and dog walkers. Good. Really good, actually. They want to book 3 family retreat packages for next summer. Caleb's sustainable tourism company had grown steadily over the past 18 months, focusing on destinations that catered to families with young children. The irony wasn't lost on him that his greatest professional success had come from embracing the very thing he'd once run from. That's wonderful. And you don't have to travel for it? Nope. Everything can be handled from here. The most I'll be away is maybe 2 days for the initial site visit, and that's only if you're comfortable with it. It was a conversation they'd had dozens of times over the past 2 years. The careful negotiation of business trips, the detailed itineraries, the constant reassurance that his presence was temporary, not permanent. Isla had learned to trust his returns, but some scars took longer to heal than others. "I'm comfortable with it," she said, and meant it. Besides, Charlotte's been wanting an excuse for an extended sleepover with her favorite godchildren. They'd remarried 6 months ago in a small ceremony in their penthouse with Mason and Leah as the only witnesses, not because they had to, but because they'd wanted to, because they'd built something new from the ruins of what they'd almost lost, and it deserved to be celebrated. The playground was busy with weekend families, and Isla watched Caleb help Mason navigate the climbing structure, while keeping one eye on Leah, who was now demanding to be put down so she could inspect a particularly interesting leaf. "Careful, sweetheart," Isla murmured as Leah toddled toward a puddle with scientific curiosity. "She's fine," said a familiar voice behind her. "That girl's got her parents' survival instincts." Isla turned to find Charlotte approaching with coffee, and the satisfied expression of someone who'd successfully navigated the weekend farmer's market. "You're late. I got distracted by the most amazing honey vendor. Also, I may have bought enough organic baby food to feed a small army." Charlotte handed Isla a cup and settled beside her on the bench. "How are the terrible twos treating you?" "They're not terrible. They're just determined. Diplomatic. I like it." Charlotte watched Caleb demonstrate proper slide technique for Mason, who was more interested in climbing up the slide backward. "He's really changed, hasn't he?" It wasn't the first time Charlotte had made this observation, but it never stopped surprising Isla how completely Caleb had transformed. The man who'd once scheduled his life in 15-minute increments now built his days around nap times and feeding schedules. The man who'd once fled from commitment now read bedtime stories with voices for every character, and knew exactly which stuffed animal each twin preferred for comfort. "We both have," Isla replied, watching as Caleb caught Mason at the bottom of the slide and spun him around until he shrieked with delight. "Becoming parents changes you in ways you don't expect. And becoming parents together? After everything you went through?" Isla considered the question as she watched her family. The road back hadn't been easy. There had been arguments, moments of doubt, nights when old fears crept in and made her question whether leopards really could change their spots. But there had also been morning coffee brought to bed, surprise date nights arranged around babysitter schedules, and the quiet satisfaction of watching Caleb discover that the best adventures were the ones that ended with coming home. "It's taught us that love isn't just a feeling," Isla said finally. "It's a choice you make every day, sometimes every hour, and when you choose each other consistently, even when it's hard, you build something stronger than what you had before." "Mama," Leah had discovered a dandelion and was toddling back to share her treasure, her face bright with pride at her find. "Oh, how beautiful, baby girl." Isla accepted the slightly wilted flower with the reverence it deserved. "What do you say we show Daddy and Mason?" As they walked toward the playground, Leah chattering about her dandelion discovery in the complex language only she understood, Isla felt the familiar warmth of contentment settle around her shoulders like a favorite sweater. 2 years ago, she'd thought her story was about abandonment, about learning to be strong enough to raise children alone. But it had turned out to be about something entirely different, about second chances, about the courage to rebuild trust, about discovering that sometimes the most beautiful families were the ones that had been broken and chosen to heal. "Daddy, look!" Leah thrust her dandelion toward Caleb with the enthusiasm of someone presenting a rare diamond. "Wow, Leah Bug, that's the most perfect dandelion I've ever seen," Caleb said with the serious appreciation that made him such an excellent father. "Should we make a wish on it?" "Yes," Mason shouted, scrambling down from the slide to join them. They gathered in a circle on the grass, Caleb holding Mason, Isla with Leah on her lap, while their daughter held the dandelion like a magic wand. "What should we wish for?" Caleb asked. "Ice cream," Mason declared. "Puppy," Leah added, though she was terrified of dogs. "For our family to always be this happy," Isla said softly, meeting Caleb's eyes over their children's heads. "For the wisdom to never take this for granted," Caleb added, his voice thick with the emotion that still caught him off guard sometimes when he looked at what they'd built together. They helped Leah blow the dandelion seeds into the wind, watching them dance away on the autumn breeze like tiny prayers released into the universe. As they packed up their picnic and headed home for nap time, Isla reflected on how different her life looked now from what she'd imagined 2 years ago. She'd thought she was preparing to be a single mother. Instead, she'd discovered the difference between someone who stays because they have to and someone who stays because they choose to, every single day. "Penny for your thoughts," Caleb said, adjusting Mason's position in the stroller while Leah walked between them, holding both their hands. "Just thinking about how much can change in 2 years. Good change?" Isla looked at their children, at the man who'd learned to love by learning to stay, at the life they'd built from the ashes of what they'd almost lost. "The best kind of change," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. That night, after the twins were asleep and they'd cleaned up the chaos of Saturday adventures, Isla and Caleb sat together on their balcony, overlooking the city lights. The silence between them was comfortable now, filled with shared understanding rather than careful distance. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if I hadn't seen that Instagram post?" Caleb asked quietly. "Sometimes," Isla admitted. "But then I remember that love has a way of finding its way back when it's meant to. Maybe not immediately, maybe not easily, but eventually." "You really believe that?" "I have to. Because the alternative is believing that Mason and Leah came into this world just to teach us how to be strong enough to live without each other. And that doesn't feel like the kind of story they deserve." Caleb pulled her closer, and she settled against his chest with the ease of someone who'd learned to trust in the safety of his arms again. "What kind of story do they deserve?" "The kind where love wins," she said simply. "Where people make mistakes but learn from them. Where families can be broken and still choose to heal. Where the ending isn't perfect but it's real." As the city settled into sleep around them, Isla closed her eyes and listened to the sound of Caleb's heartbeat, steady and sure beneath her cheek. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, toddler tantrums and business meetings and the thousand small decisions that made up a shared life. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, in the arms of a man who'd learned the difference between running toward something and running away from it, in a home filled with the soft breathing of children who would never doubt that they were wanted, in a love story that had been broken and remade into something stronger, something deeper, something worth fighting for. Have you ever wondered if the people who hurt us the most are sometimes the ones capable of loving us the deepest, if we're brave enough to let them try? Share your thoughts about second chances and the courage it takes to rebuild trust after it's been shattered. Your participation means a lot to the channel. Please share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please subscribe to our channel and leave a comment below letting us know what you thought. Your feedback and support mean a lot to us. Stay tuned for more exciting stories.